All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. In this episode of We Rise Fighting, we speak to Madeline Topf, who is a microbiologist and co-president of her union, the Teaching Assistant Association, or TAA Local 3220 in Madison, Wisconsin. Local 3220 is also affiliated with the American Federation of Teachers. Now, this is a really cool interview that touches on the 2011 passage of Act 10 in Wisconsin, which, to refresh the memory of anyone who needs it, was a piece of anti-union legislation that was proposed and passed by then-Governor Scott Walker, which brought hundreds of thousands of people to the streets in prolonged protests. Some of y'all may have seen the images of the state capitol inundated by workers and community members, or remember the pizza orders being called in by Egyptian workers in solidarity. The struggle against Act 10 definitely left its own mark in U.S. labor history, so I'm excited that we get to cover that with Madeline. We'll also talk about the TAA's November resolution concerning the liberation of Palestine and why graduate student workers organize into unions. All that and more after we check out some Sweet Honey in the Rock. Here's their song, We Are the Ones.
We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. 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 We are the ones, we've been waiting.
Good evening, listeners. This is Brian and Rick again from We Rise Fighting. We're honored to be here tonight with Madeline from the co-president of the Teaching Assistants Association, AFT, American Federation of Teachers, Local 3220. Welcome, Madeline. How are you doing tonight?
Great. How are you?
All right. So tell us about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do at UW-Madison? And why'd you choose union work?
Yeah, so I'm from Iowa originally, and I came to UW-Madison to do my PhD in microbiology. I'm starting my 5th year in the program. And my PhD mostly consists of doing research in the lab, which is definitely a lot of work. And I got really interested in kind of advocating for better working conditions for graduate students when I first started my PhD and joined our union, the TAA, and then kind of worked up within the organization. I became co-president last year and served for a year, and now I'm starting my 2nd year as co-president.
Got it. And Madeline, I did have a chance to read a little bit about your union, and it seems there's a lot to be proud of. You guys have a pretty long history and have participated in strikes. What are some of the things that make you the most proud of your union?
Well, one thing that makes me really proud of our union is we're the first graduate student union in the country. And that's always really cool to say, especially as our workers, our turnover rate is really high. So there's every year new grad students coming in, and it's cool to be able to say, hey, we've been around for a really long time, or people who haven't heard of us at all, no, we've been here for a really long time. And there's more and more grad student unions that are being formed or going on strike and things like that, so people will hear about that. I also think we have a really long history of activism and kind of using our ability to withhold labor to further other causes. So like originally, actually, the TAA was a group of TAs that wanted to protest the Vietnam War and aspects of the Vietnam War, and figured out that they could use like their labor as either graders or teachers to like advance their demands. So I think that's really cool. We've been pretty like very, very active over time, and we're a huge part of like the Act 10 protests in 2011 in Wisconsin. As like collective bargaining was being repealed for public workers, the TAA was kind of at the center of that. So I think it's cool to go to different events around town and meet other people involved in labor in Wisconsin, because they have such a great view of the TAA. They're like, you guys you've led all this stuff, you've done a lot. And so it's cool to be a part of that history.
And I have another question, Madeline. For the benefit of some of our listeners, and we have kind of a broad spectrum of listeners here, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with why graduate students are organizing into unions, could you just give us a kind of brief on that? Brief description of what's going on with graduate student workers? Like, what are their grievances? What are their workplace conditions? Why do they unionize?
Totally. For most grad students who, particularly if you are getting a PhD, but also if you're getting a master's, most graduate students have to work in addition to taking classes or doing whatever research that they want to do or writing their dissertation. And the type of this work varies, and it can vary for some students semester by semester. But students will TA, which is either teach an undergrad course or grade a course or lead discussion sections. There are also research assistants, which are people like me. So we work in the lab, we do research as part of our education, but also our research is compensated. So I get a stipend for the year, and then I have funding for like the entirety of my degree. And so a big thing that we noticed right away when we start grad school is there's kind of sometimes when we are students, when we're getting our degree, when we're going to classes or we're learning, and then there's some times when we are workers. And so because we are workers, it's really important to have a union. And so we are really concerned with things like pay, just general working conditions like harassment and bullying within the academic environment, time, like hours. So some TAs will have to grade papers really late into the night or sit in on proctor exams really late, which can be really detrimental if you're also trying to do research on your thesis. And so the union is really valuable for grad students to kind of negotiate and advocate for better working conditions, but also to have a network and a community of support while you're going through grad school, because grad school can be really tough, like mentally, you're trying to extend the limits of what you know, and it can be pretty difficult, pretty demanding. So I think that's a big part of it, as well as the community aspect.
So you mentioned some of your history, and part of that is the 1970 strike, and in relationship to what you're doing today. And we're going to ask a few questions about where you're at today. But going back to the 1970 strike and that grounding in activism, as you mentioned, organizing union from the beginning, especially coming out of that strike in the 1970, which was part of the social movements at the time, which you also mentioned. What are your how does that history relate to what you're doing today, especially the 1970s, but also the TAA, of course, has been active since then in a whole variety of different types of social movements?
I think we're kind of seeing now as well in how we're kind of framing it. So in 1970, there were a set of protests around the Vietnam War, like to protest the Dow Chemical Company, which made napalm. And these protests were broken up very violently by university police. And in response to that, the kind of group of TAs went on strike for 4 days. And this was kind of the genesis of the TAA. And later, this group adopted like demands over working conditions, and then went on strike again in 1970, I believe, after these demands, like they weren't reaching anywhere good with the negotiations that they were having with the administration. It just wasn't going anywhere. So then they went on strike again in 1970 and won pretty like amazing things that now we really take for granted as grad students, like guaranteed levels of work, and health insurance, and out-of-state tuition remission. So a lot of people, when we tell them like, hey, like you don't have to pay tuition to go do your PhD, like that was a union win. I think that it's really important for us to remember the wins that we've gotten over time and help people understand that was a result of the union. And like having a job for you when you come in is also a win. Like that nobody has to go to grad school and just take on a bunch of debt and pay tuition is like a big one of the TAA. And so I think also we're seeing parallels now with the encampment protest last month, and TAA members were a big part of both organizing and then going to and supporting the encampment protests. And as a union, we kind of both support those students who choose to attend with like the rights that we have as the union. So if anyone's in a disciplinary meeting, we're able to represent them. And so we do see a lot of like overlap with what the history was in 1970, 1960s, and then what we're involved with today.
So you mentioned Act 10, Madeline. For the benefit of our listeners who might not know what that is, can you just describe that generally? And then also the TAA's participation in the protests from day one of that union busting law, which was passed or pushed by the, at the time, the governor was Scott Walker, but also many other forces were behind him. Of course, he was essentially, we all know, a puppet of the rich. And just like TAA's role in that, and then also continuing from there 4 years later, for the benefit of listeners, right to work for less laws, which are rooted in Jim Crow, of course, that was passed in 2015. And there's been a variety of other attacks against labor in Wisconsin. So generally, can you just speak to some of that, Madeline?
Yeah, so Act 10 was an anti-union law that went into effect in 2011. And the biggest thing it did is it severely restricted collective bargaining for public workers in Wisconsin. So school teachers and then graduate students are also public workers. And it has a bunch of very like insidious stipulations that we really confront day to day when we're organizing. It's actually very tricky and very effective the way they wrote it. So like the biggest thing is that in order to have official bargaining rights, you have to be a certified union. And to be a certified union under Act 10, you have to have a majority of your bargaining unit vote yes for the union. And so this is a huge task for unions that recertify every year, and there are a number of them in the state. But for us, our bargaining unit is very large. It's like, I think between like 6,000 and 8,000, depending on exact specifications. But we'd have to have a vote, and over half of the 6,000 people total would have to vote yes. So it's not just half of people who show up to vote, it's like over half of the entire bargaining unit. And so this is just really, really, really difficult. It would also entail like you to fill out a physical ballot that comes to the mail that looks like junk mail. There are other tricky things that come into effect when you actually have that vote. And then once you do all that, the only thing you can legally bargain over is the cost of living adjustment for inflation of that year. So we wouldn't be able to talk about paid leave, which was a big issue in our union right now, we wouldn't be able to talk about workplace harassment and mistreatment of people. We wouldn't be able to talk about work hours, things like that. You can only bargain around cost of living adjustment legally. So it really restricts what you can talk about and what you can bargain over, and then also what counts as a union. so this makes us have to be very, very creative when we organize, and we kind of choose issues or sets of issues and really organize around them and push them through just our power that we have. I believe Act 10 also makes striking illegal for public unions, even if you are certified. And at the time, the TAA was really involved with organizing protests at the Wisconsin Capitol as in response to this law. And now, actually, this past year, we are part of a lawsuit that's suing Act 10. And the legal argument is essentially that after Act 10 was passed, there were public safety employees like police and firefighters that still retained their rights. Like, they had full rights, collective bargaining rights. They could bargain over anything. They didn't have to meet this recertification stipulation every year. And they're public employees, but they didn't have to do it. And other public employees like teachers and grad students did. So we're kind of saying this is unfair because it's creating two different classes of public employees. And this argument was successful in Missouri, I think, recently. So we're hopeful about it going forward. And this is just one of the tools that we're using to advance bargaining rights for our local.
Now, Madeline, a little earlier you mentioned some activism around the Vietnam War back in the day for your union. And to kind of fast forward that today, and thank you for sharing that, by the way, I was unaware of that. But to fast forward it to today, the TAA recently in November put out a resolution in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And honestly, we've had people on this show before who have put out great resolutions, and I have to say that TAA is definitely one of them. And so just wanted to see what the background was on that, how that came to being, basically.
Yeah, so Palestine is a big issue for our local, and we have a lot of members who are very well-informed and really passionate about justice in Palestine. And so the background was a bunch of members came together and wrote it. And I think it was cool in the union sense because we got a lot of people involved who weren't necessarily involved with the union before. So I think this, for us, it's a great way to engage more people, also bring in people to the union that weren't in it before, also work together with other groups on campus. So there's a group called Students for Justice in Palestine, which is both grad and undergrad students that they were one of the groups that started the encampment. So they're working on this issue. They also led a lot of the organizing around the uninstructed campaign. So I think so what happened was just people got together and wrote a big draft. We had a general member meeting where we were going to vote to adopt this resolution. We had a lot of debate, but really the debate was we want to go further. It's how radical do we want to be? It's really the debate that was going on in our union. People had I think one member brought a lot of amendments, and we use kind of like a rough Robert's rules to like go through and amend different parts of the resolution, and then we eventually voted to adopt this. So,
Now,
yeah.
okay, and just one quick follow-up question. So TAA is affiliated with the American Federation of Teachers, correct?
Yeah.
And in that resolution, y'all actually critique, I think fairly, the AFT for their support of Israel. And just wanted to see how that's played out, if in any way, if that's kind of made any waves or anything like that.
Not directly. I think, if I remember correctly, a while back, people wanted to write a letter to the president of AFT, Randy Weingarten, kind of on their resolution or try to amend it in some way, but the timing didn't work out. But we also have members that were really involved with South Central Federation of Labor, which is like the federation that brings in a bunch of unions across Wisconsin, and helped write a statement for them, and we're kind of pushing them to go to AFT, I think, but there's no like direct I found that AFT is pretty hands off of our local. We don't get a lot of like, you guys can or can't say this, or you should or shouldn't do this from AFT, that were our affiliation. And generally, I think from National's point of view, Wisconsin is really tough. So I think it's been cool. We've been very vocal and very active too with organizing, despite being in Wisconsin, because I think for a while, AFT didn't really know what to do with their locals in Wisconsin, because we lost all of our rights, and they're like, oh, how do we like function? Because this is not something we're used to being able to do. So we didn't really get much pushback or anything, at least that I'm aware of. I didn't write the resolution, but so maybe they have a different experience, but I don't remember there being anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd also like to highlight something that you said earlier for the benefit of our listeners, because this is the type of thing that we try to talk about, kind of building solidarity with other movements, building an intersectional movement. And so when you said that, the resolution on Palestine got some interest from new members, or people got interested in the union. Could you speak to that a little bit? Like, what was that like? What did you see personally? Just for the sake of our listeners who, a lot of folks just think of union as, negotiate the contract, process the grievances, not so much as like a social movement. So could you tell us a little bit more, how did you get people excited? Like, what was the reaction about that?
Yeah, I think without like collective bargaining rights, we really have to go based on what people are excited about. We have to rally around issues that people really care about, and that's how we build power. So we're not necessarily like, we're not processing grievances, we're not bargaining contracts, really. We really have to engage, we really have to organize. That's all that we have, is bringing in new people. And in order to do that, you have to have something for them to latch onto, and you need them to be excited about what you're doing. And so that's all that we think about. I think I was surprised initially. I totally get it. I think it's great. I think I was surprised initially because I'm oh, people, because I would just assume people would only want to get involved if they were more selfish almost. Oh, I only want to get involved in the union because I want to make more money. But we had all these people that want to get involved on Palestine. So I was that's great. And have a very strong opinion about how things are worded and what we do as the union and what organizations we support. And then it's cool because a lot of it is just overlap in terms of what we're doing in the union is talking to people and trying to get them to sign something or to do an action or show up. And uninstructed campaign, for example, I thought was really brilliant in how it was organizing. It was calling people and say, can you vote uninstructed? And so a lot of union members had experience doing that type of organizing and got involved with that campaign. And just like called or texted people in Wisconsin, but also TAA members specifically, like we had lists that we were working off of. And so I think having the union is really powerful for those types of campaigns because you have that list or you have those people that would be interested in hearing from you. So I think, and so like in the encampment protest, it was like it was great organizing for the union because we were very present there. We showed up a lot and it was a great place to talk to people about the union and why it's important. Because people who are maybe interested in it are showing up. And also demonstrating that we supported Palestine and people who chose to protest. So like as a union, we have lawyers. We also have the power of doing rallies and we have the power of our labor, right? So we can support people in that way by like organizing around them.
All right, so this is going to be a bit of a background and an extended question. So you mentioned a variety of different things, the international aspects that are taking place with your local, which were there. We were present in February of 2011, occupying the Capitol with TAA members and many, many others. And there was an international aspect to that. And that, of course, as you mentioned, was very planned and surgical strike against us as labor in Wisconsin in terms of how the laws were written by the Bradley Foundation and other right-wing think tanks. And that the result of that is the austerity and the UW system being dismantled before our eyes right now. 6 two-year campuses are being shut down, and a variety of other austerity and faculty cuts at UW Oshkosh and other places. But you mentioned something I think that is that we've raised on this show many, many times, that even in some of the most extreme environments like North Carolina in the South, there's been formations like the Southern Workers Assembly and many others, the Southern Service Workers, that in some of the most extreme hostile anti-union environments, they're actually not only stopping up anti-labor laws, they're actually advancing. So my question to you is, Madeline, that you mentioned that you're organizing and that's a consistent focus of your local, and you've been winning some concessions through that, such as paid leave this last year, among others, concessions. And what's your thoughts on that in the Wisconsin of today, which really resembles a southern state in terms of labor law now? Where are we going to go from here, and what's your local's focus on that type of organizing?
Yeah, so in some ways, and we talk about this a lot within our own local, that really the power that we have is in organizing the workers, and it's not based on any sort of legal definition that we have. And people have been organizing long before it was legal and risking a lot more than we are. And so in that, it's not, oh, we don't have collective bargaining, let's just give up and wait for it to come back, because it's not going to come back in the same way that we had it before either, really. And so we've had to heavily rely on getting new members, engaging people that aren't members. And one example of this is our paid leave campaign, which we started a year ago, and we wrote a petition calling for 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave for all grad students, staff, and faculty at UW-Madison. And so we circulated this, collected a lot of signatures, over 700 signatures across campus, and then we held a rally where we delivered the petition as well as Valentine's, because it was Valentine's Day, that detailed people's stories of what it was like to navigate paid leave. And I think this story aspect was really powerful because when we had the petition, we asked people to say, oh, if you had a experience navigating paid family or medical leave, let us know, and we would share these anonymously with press, with the chancellor, and like with other students, which really helped people understand the issue, because paid leave specifically is not something you would really encounter until you needed it. So a lot of people didn't know we didn't have a policy at all before now. And so raising awareness and then building power behind this issue, we found out in less than a year that we had 6 weeks of paid parental leave for grad students. And then this actually applied to all faculty and staff across the UW system. So that was really cool. It's like our organizing here at UW-Madison affected people all around the state. And I think it's been really inspiring. There's faculty and staff unions that represent workers all across the state. So Oshkosh, Green Bay, La Crosse, like all of the UWs have faculty and staff unions. And they're all AFT affiliated. So we're able to share with them kind of the techniques that we've used to be effective and to win on paid leave. And then they're right now really fighting some of the austerity we were talking about with like entire departments. They're trying to cut entire departments. They're firing people without really telling them before it's going to happen, things like that. And a tool that we're really pushing across the state, actually, and then TAA as well, is called Meet and Confer. And this is a union term that we are trying to win. And this is, instead of bargaining, it would just be regular meetings with administration. So we want to meet like once a semester with the chancellor, which is the president of UW-Madison. And these other locals are asking for it as well. And this would just give an opportunity to sit down and kind of discuss issues. And it's not official negotiating, or official collective bargaining, but it would take the place of it, I guess. And other Wisconsin locals use this and can win a lot. But of course, we asked the chancellor to meet with us, and she said no, because they kind of know, like they know what they're getting into, because they don't want to meet with the union because we represent a lot of people and we can really move our base. So you can really have like energize people or take another step. But we're kind of right now organizing around that, showing people really want this relationship. So this is also an example of how we can navigate organizing under Act 10 is this meet and confer. Like if we met every year and talked about issues, it would be pretty powerful. And we don't need to have like official collective bargaining to do that.
Okay. Last question from me, perhaps. Real simple and basic question. What inspires you? And it can be anything. It can be labor history. It could be a cup of coffee. It could be music. It could be culture. But what inspires you to do labor work and union work these days?
Working as a scientist, what really inspires me is my friends who are also grad students and they're also scientists. And just like the passion that people have for what they're doing at work. Like, I think it's just so inspiring to see people care so much about the research they're doing, a particular question. People will spend like nights in the lab collecting data. It's like, no one's making you do this. Like, people just care so much about their work, and to see, and they're so smart, because you can't get into a graduate school unless you're like really smart and you've taken all the tests and you have all the experience. And then just to be dismissed daily, like not compensated well, treated like you are expendable or that you're like a little kid who's being annoying. Like, to see that day in and day out is like like inspiring to me, and then is why I'm so like passionate about this, because I think that is to me, I've seen like, okay, in grad school, like we're supposed to be these smart people and we're so talented. Why aren't we being treated well? And you see everywhere that people work, they know what they're doing and they're not being treated well. You know, like it is a pattern across like all people. And I think that has been really powerful for me as I'm like getting involved with the union, is to realize that we all share this. It doesn't matter if you're in grad school, you're still treated as if you were working at Amazon or something. Like the techniques that the bosses use to like make you feel that you're not worth it are the same. Like it doesn't matter. I went to, you know, somebody is like brilliant. It's still labor, like at the end of the day. So I think, yeah, I think that keeps me, it's like not only inspiring to see people be so driven and passionate and put up, like I was talking to a reporter and she was interested, like, okay, what, like she was kind of starting as a higher ed reporter and wanted to know like what grad students were like. And I'm like, people will put up with a lot to get their degree. They care so much about what they're studying and want to get this degree so badly that they'll just put up with so much. It's like very resilient grad students, I think.
All right, Madeline, so we're gonna get one question to close today. And if you want to add anything at the end, feel free to. In our last episode, we had, in fact, one of our friends in Wisconsin, Joanna, from ASME Local 1, and women from Texas and Virginia. And right now, Rick and I talk a lot about this on We Rise Fighting here, about the labor upsurge that's taken place across the country in all kinds of sectors, including higher education, academia, academic workers, all kinds of others, industrial workers, workers in transportation, a lot of different union activities taking place, the UAW, of course, Teamsters. And within all of that, there's many more historically disenfranchised, and especially women becoming leaders. And just a general question for you, your thoughts on that and the role of women leadership in unions today.
I mean, I think it's awesome. Like, just like what I've really learned is just how to be more like assertive or just like really lead, you know, have a lot of confidence and not like be very direct with people. I think I've learned a lot of good communication skills that I probably wasn't socialized to have before I started this job. I've like loved doing this, and I think like it's really been an honor to be president of TAA and to try to like orient us on a good path that will hopefully continue while like even after I'm gone. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that super.
Okay,
great.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
That's all the questions on my end. For the listeners, I would like to highlight it, and I do encourage listeners to go to your website, which is TAA-Madison.org. Is it, Madeline?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so go to TAA-Madison.org and check out what they got, especially that statement on Palestine. It's called A Call for Palestinian Liberation. And if you've listened to this show, you know that that's the kind of stuff that we report on. We report on both Palestine and labor right now, half and half each show. And this statement is a really good statement. It's right up there with the conversations and statements released by GEO and also the United Auto Workers on the West Coast right now. So we do encourage it. These are some of the best resolutions that we've seen. Thank you for sharing them with us. Also, thank you for being on the show with us today. You know, we hope to have you on the show again. And thank you, listeners, for listening yet again. Love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone.